A man and a young boy journeyed on foot along a dusty path that stretched far into the horizon, the sun casting long shadows behind them as the day wore on. Along the way, the man recounted what he had heard about General CornhwaSama's immense wealth, speaking with a tone that hinted at hope for a better future. According to what had reached his ears, the general's prosperity was so vast that, from now on, the boy would no longer have to endure the pain of hunger. This promise of stability seemed to hang in the air between them like an unspoken vow. Yet, despite the man's assurances, the boy's thoughts remained elsewhere on the face he had left behind. He quietly wondered if he would ever be able to see his mother again, and though the man responded without cruelty, his words carried a sobering finality. He explained that things would become complicated from now on. Still, there remained a faint glimmer of hope. One day, when the boy had grown strong and could work for himself, the opportunity to return and see his mother might present itself. Their journey continued in silence after that exchange. The boy deepened thought and the man focused on reaching their destination. Eventually, after a long stretch of walking, the outline of a large house emerged in the distance, standing dignified amid the surrounding fields. When they arrived at the entrance, the man wasted no time and presented a written document to a man of the household who inspected the paper and acknowledged the boy's name as Dalso. Nearby, seated in an elevated area that offered a clear view of the proceedings, a noblewoman observed the new arrival. Taking note of Dalso's worn-out appearance and his tired posture, she commented that he must have had quite a journey. Without hesitation, she instructed her subordinate to summon another servant to take the boy away, ensuring he was given a proper bath and a fresh change of clothes. Her orders continued without pause, adding that a pig should be chosen and sent to the Choi household as part of the formalities. She also directed that a notarized letter be requested from the local government office, to which her subordinate gave a respectful acknowledgement and departed to carry out her will. Not long after, a young girl stepped out from the house behind the noblewoman, her daughter, full of youthful energy and enthusiasm. She eagerly approached her mother, proudly displaying her latest drawing. The artwork, which she claimed depicted butterflies, actually seemed more like a depiction of a cat chasing a rat. Nonetheless, her mother indulged her with a warm smile and kind affirmation. As the girl looked around, her eyes met Dalso's. He had been watching her with quiet curiosity, and in a gesture of politeness, he bowed and introduced himself. The girl, momentarily flustered, returned the greeting with a shy voice, stating her name was So-hee before dashing back inside the house. Later, within the more private confines of their residence, So-hee, still puzzled by the boy's presence, turned to her mother with a question about why he had come to live with them. Her mother, ever playful, teased her daughter about her apparent interest in the newcomer. So-hee, embarrassed, quickly insisted it was only curiosity. With a more serious tone, her mother then clarified that Dalso had been brought over from the Choi household and was, for the time being, too young and inexperienced to be tasked with hard labor. Until he grew more capable, she intended to assign him to So-hee, where he would serve as her personal attendant. The announcement surprised So-hee, who had not expected such a role for the boy. Her mother concluded by noting that since it was summer, there would be many small tasks needing attention, and if So-hee needed help with anything, she could rely on Dalso for assistance. So-hee, after a moment's thought, gave a quiet nod, accepting her new companion with a mixture of surprise and growing curiosity. Later that day, Dalso found himself alone in a quiet part of the house, examining the fine shirt he now wore. His fingers ran carefully over the fabric, marveling at the quality. It was softer and more refined than anything he had worn before, and as he touched it, he couldn't help but feel both awkward and grateful, aware that this new life was already far removed from what he had known. As he stood there lost in thought, a girl appeared before him, her presence sudden but not unfriendly. She observed him with curiosity and asked if he was the new servant. Dalso, startled, responded hesitantly, asking who she was. With an air of self-assurance, she introduced herself as Yoriam, explaining that she was 12 years old and currently in her final year of training within the household. She warned him, with a slight smirk, not to underestimate her simply because of her age, insisting that despite being younger, she knew her way around the household and the expectations placed on them. She then asked if it was true that he was 13, which Dalso affirmed with a shy nod. Yoriam went on to explain that, given his age and current position, he would likely be working under her supervision, assisting in his role as the personal servant of So-hee. Dalso, unfamiliar with the name, asked who So-hee was. Yoriam, clearly surprised, explained that So-hee was the second daughter of General CornhwaSama, a person of gentle demeanor and rare kindness. She added that Dalso might eventually hear troubling rumors about noblewomen who were cruel and selfish, but assured him that So-hee was not one of them. In fact, she considered him lucky for being assigned to someone like her. With that said, Yoriam turned and departed, leaving Dalso to process everything he had just learned. The next day brought a change of pace. The atmosphere was lighter as Yoriam, Dalso, and another boy gathered outside to play a game of hide and seek. Dalso, blindfolded, was designated as the seeker, groping around with uncertain steps and swinging arms, laughing along with the others despite never managing to tag anyone. The laughter carried in the air as the children darted around the courtyard. Not far from them, Sohee watched quietly from behind a wooden post, her expression a mix of hesitation and longing. Drawn by the sound of joy and the sight of her peers enjoying themselves, she slowly stepped forward, catching the attention of Yoriam and the boy, who greeted her warmly. Dalso, still blindfolded and unaware of her arrival, assumed it was a trick when he heard someone mention Sohee's name. Refusing to fall for what he thought was a prank, he lunged forward, his hands grasping onto someone. The girl he caught froze in place, Sohee, stunned by the sudden contact. Yoriam and the boy stared in disbelief, their eyes wide. Dalso, thinking he had finally caught Yoriam, removed his blindfold with a triumphant smile that quickly gave way to horror as he recognized Sohee instead. Shocked and mortified, he dropped to the ground, bowing deeply and begging for forgiveness. But Sohee, ever gentle, reassured him that there was no harm done. She told him to rise, reminding him that he had only been playing and that his eyes had been covered. There was no need for such worry. Her understanding tone and forgiving nature immediately lightened the mood, and the others relaxed once more. Encouraged by her warmth, Sohee admitted that she had come over because she saw how much fun they were having. Yoriam, pleased, asked if she would like to join them, and Sohee nodded shyly in agreement. Seizing the moment, Yoriam mentioned that elders rarely ventured into this part of the estate, but even so, she knew an even better place to continue playing, a quiet, thatched structure tucked away from sight. There, they resumed their game. Dalso once again wore the blindfold while the others scattered and called out teases to distract him. Despite their best efforts, Dalso managed to catch Sohee again, this time without the shock or embarrassment of before. When it was Sohee's turn to be blindfolded, she moved so cautiously and slowly that Dalso eventually stood still in her direction, allowing her to tag him easily. This act of kindness did not go unnoticed, and the others playfully scolded him, insisting he wasn't supposed to let himself get caught on purpose. Later in the day, Dalso made his way to the inner quarters where he had been summoned by Sohee's mother. The atmosphere was quiet and composed, and as he stood before her, she took a moment to inquire gently about his well-being. Expressing a desire to ensure that he was adjusting comfortably to his new life in the household and that nothing had caused him distress or discomfort. Dalso, ever polite and composed, responded respectfully, assuring her that everything within the estate thus far had been to his satisfaction. Upon hearing this, Sohee's mother expressed her relief and contentment, visibly pleased by his words. She then beckoned him to step closer, and as he did, she reached out and offered him a tender gesture of comfort by patting his head, her tone softening further as she spoke of having heard that he had been disheartened by the separation from his mother. She praised the strength and maturity he had shown in overcoming his sorrow despite his young age and offered him reassurance, telling him that should he ever face any trouble or hardship, he need not hesitate to come to her. Furthermore, she asked that he look after Sohee as well, entrusting him with a sense of responsibility towards her daughter that Dalso humbly accepted with a quiet nod. Later that night, the stillness of the surrounding forest was broken by the rhythmic sound of hooves pounding against the earth as a group of mounted soldiers emerged, their arrival swift and purposeful as they rode in formation under the pale glow of the moon. Not long after, a male servant stationed near the outer gates caught sight of the approaching figures and immediately hurried to the main quarters to relay the news of the general's return. The household quickly stirred to life as the servants filed out in orderly fashion, assembling at the entrance to welcome the returning warriors. They bowed in unison, voices raised in gratitude and respect, expressing thanks to the general for his tireless dedication and efforts in safeguarding the nation. Among them, Dalso stood quietly, taking in the sight of the famed General Kwok, a towering presence known throughout the land for his legendary prowess and the ability to subdue dangerous criminals with nothing but his bare hands. His commanding presence was difficult to ignore, but what caught Dalso's attention even more was the presence of a strikingly youthful man riding beside him, his appearance and demeanor standing out amidst the hardened veterans. Following their arrival, General Kwok addressed the assembled servants, declaring that the journey had been long and arduous and that they were in need of food and rest. A celebratory feast was to be prepared without delay. The servants responded promptly, springing into action with practiced efficiency as they began organizing the banquet. Amid the flurry of movement, the head servant took charge of delegating duties, directing each person to their specific tasks. With many hands already occupied, he turned to Dalso and entrusted him with a particular assignment to prepare a small table for the general in his private room, complete with ginseng appetizers. It was explained that there was a matter the general needed to attend to in his chambers before joining the others at the banquet. In addition to the food, Dalso was handed a cloth designed to dim the candlelight, adding a layer of refinement and ambience to the setting. The task, though simple, was one that required care, and Dalso was assured it would be manageable. Carrying out his instructions with focus and care, Dalso made his way to the general's quarters. Once inside, he placed the small table neatly and arranged the ginseng dishes with precision. He straightened the bed linens, ensuring that the space reflected the dignity of its occupant, and then carefully draped the cloth over the candle to mute the light, casting the room in a soft, flickering glow. Just as he was completing the final touches, the sound of the door opening caused him to stiffen. To his astonishment, General Kwok entered the room accompanied not by another soldier or attendant but by his wife. The unexpected nature of their entrance, coupled with the general's formidable presence, startled Dalso so thoroughly that he instinctively ducked behind an ornate decorative screen at the edge of the room. From his concealed position, he watched in disbelief as the general, far from preparing for the banquet, began what appeared to be a physical training routine with his wife present. Meanwhile, in the lively gathering hall not far from the main residence, General Kwok's men were seen indulging in the celebratory feast that had been prepared in their honor. The room was animated with laughter and the gentle clinking of cups as elegant women attended to the returning soldiers, pouring wine into their cups with practiced grace, while a lady at the corner played a soft, rhythmic tune on a traditional instrument, lending the space a festive ambience. The soldiers, having returned from the front lines, appeared eager to relax and bask in the glory of their latest campaign. One of the women, clad in vibrant silk, leaned closer to a soldier as she refilled his cup, her tone laced with curiosity and admiration as she invited him to recount the tale of his triumph over the barbarian forces. Without hesitation, the seasoned warrior downed the drink in a single gulp and responded with a flourish of bravado. With evident pride, he claimed that in their most recent battle, he had personally cut down 20 barbarians with his own blade. He described how the blood of his enemies had splattered across his armor and sword, so much so that even those who merely witnessed his ferocity had turned and fled in terror. The exaggerated tone in his voice carried the boastfulness of a man who relished in his reputation. Another soldier nearby joined in the exchange, adding that their enemies stood no chance against them, particularly because of the exceptional warrior who had fought by his side, whose strength alone had turned the tide of the battle. The woman attending to the young man seated near them turned her gaze toward him with intrigue, pouring him a fresh cup of wine as she mentioned that she had heard whispers about a prodigious swordsman emerging in the ranks. Rumors that described him as a once-in-a-generation talent destined to become the greatest swordsman in the Joseon kingdom. She expressed her honor at being able to serve someone of such promise. The young soldier, however, remained modest and soft-spoken in contrast to his companions. With a calm demeanor, he assured her that the praises being thrown about were nothing more than exaggerations by overzealous comrades. He admitted that he was still new to the battlefield with much yet to learn and prove. Despite her attentions and the admiration in her voice, the woman gradually noticed that the young warrior showed little interest in her presence, his thoughts seemingly elsewhere, untouched by the flattery and revelry that surrounded him. As the evening wore on and more cups were emptied, the mood among the more seasoned soldiers shifted slightly, turning to matters of politics and power within the military ranks. The first warrior, emboldened by drink, steered the conversation toward General Jael, voicing his concern that the general had begun overstepping his bounds, encroaching too much upon General Kwok's responsibilities. He pointed out that, historically, it was General Kwok who always played the pivotal role in their campaigns, but now with the recent elevation of Yuzeong to generalship, the balance of power appeared to be shifting. Another soldier quickly chimed in, asserting that General Jael had a reputation for humiliating other generals in front of their own men, a habit that seemed calculated to assert dominance and sow division. Yet, he noted with admiration that General Kwok had never risen to such provocations. With an iron resolve and unshakable composure, General Kwok remained dignified and patient even when others in his position might have responded in anger or sought retaliation. The conversation deepened when one of the men brought up General Jael's origins, recalling that he had once been a slave before rising through the ranks to achieve the prestigious third general rank. This detail, though impressive, only served to emphasize the remarkable character of General Kwok, who, despite the challenges and provocations, continued to serve with humility, dedication, and loyalty. In their eyes, the fact that General Kwok continued to obey orders from a man who had once been a slave and who now seemed intent on asserting superiority only proved the depth of his discipline and the strength of his character. As the young warrior sat quietly with a half-filled cup of wine in hand, his attention was momentarily drawn away from the lively chatter around him. Across the courtyard, he noticed Sohee speaking with Yoriam. The two young women seemed to be in search of someone, their expressions laced with concern. Sohee appeared to be asking Yoriam if she had seen Dalso anywhere, but Yoriam shook her head, puzzled and uncertain, openly wondering where the boy could have gone off to at such a late hour. As they scanned the area, Sohee's gaze met that of the young warrior. Recognizing him, she approached and greeted the warriors with quiet humility, her tone respectful and warm. The first of the older soldiers lit up at her arrival, remarking aloud that it had been quite some time since they had last seen her. The second soldier echoed the sentiment with a friendly nod, and the young warrior, though composed, offered her a gentle smile and a wordless nod in greeting, acknowledging her presence with quiet appreciation. Elsewhere, completely unaware of the commotion building outside, Dalso remained hidden behind a tall folding screen in General Kwok's private quarters. From his cramped and uncomfortable hiding spot, he could only listen as the general and his wife continued their intense workout session in the room. Every shifting movement and echo of their exertion made his heart pound faster. He felt as though every second in hiding stretched into eternity. Anxiety twisted within him at the thought of being discovered in such a compromising situation, and his imagination ran wild, picturing the grim possibility of the general known for his strength and brutality, skewering him on the spot for his unintended intrusion. Meanwhile, the search for Dalso continued. Sohee and Yoriam had begun combing through the grounds, checking corners and passing servants along the way, but each inquiry yielded no sign of him. Frustrated yet determined, Sohee eventually noticed something unusual, a thatched hut nearby, its door slightly ajar. With a sense of unease prickling at the back of her neck, she wondered if Dalso might have slipped inside unnoticed. Cautiously, she approached and stepped over the threshold into the dimly lit interior. However, instead of finding her friend, her presence disturbed something far more dangerous. From the shadows emerged a wild wolf, its eyes glinting with primal hunger as it lunged toward her with a low growl. The moment was tense and immediate. Before she could react, the beast had closed the distance. But in the very next instant, a flash of movement cut through the darkness. Yuziong, the young warrior who had been seated at the feast only moments before, appeared as if summoned by fate itself. With a single precise slash of his blade, he dispatched the creature before it could reach its target. The wolf fell in a motionless heap at Sohee's feet. Breathing heavily, Sohee backed away from the fallen beast, clearly shaken but immensely relieved. Yuziong stepped toward her, his expression calm but alert, and ensured she was unharmed. She offered her heartfelt thanks, still catching her breath, while he reminded her that wandering through the forest alone at night was dangerous. In a calm and collected manner, he suggested that he escort her back to safety. Grateful for his presence, Sohee accepted, and together they began making their way back through the quiet woods, the earlier tension still lingering in the silence between them. Meanwhile, within the quiet confines of the general's quarters, the sounds of exertion continued as General Kwok and his wife maintained the intensity of their private training session. Hidden behind an ornate decorative cover, Dalso remained crouched in fear, his breath shallow and limbs tense. Beads of sweat trickled down his forehead, not from heat, but from the growing dread that each passing second might be his last. Unbeknownst to the general, the flimsy screen Dalso had taken refuge behind had begun to shift precariously. The edge, loosened by movement and draft, wobbled slightly, its fall imminent. Instinct took over as Dalso reached out without thinking, steadying the structure with trembling fingers. But in that moment, the subtle movement did not go unnoticed. The general's sharp eyes caught the flicker of motion in his peripheral vision, and without hesitation, his instincts as a seasoned warrior kicked in. Without breaking stride, General Kwok drew his sword with lethal precision. In a single, fluid motion, he slashed cleanly through the cover with such force that the impact sent a gust of wind through the room. A sharp splatter of blood followed, staining the wall. Sohee's mother stood frozen for a moment, stunned by the swiftness and violence of her husband's reaction. The decorative screen now lay in tatters, its two halves falling limply to either side, revealing Dalso cowering in a kneeling position, his entire body trembling with fear. His face, pale and streaked with a thin trail of blood from a shallow gash on his forehead, looked up with wide, terrified eyes. General Kwok, still gripping his sword, leveled the blade at the boy, his voice cold and commanding as he demanded to know the identity of the intruder. Before Dalso could respond, Sohee's mother quickly stepped forward, alarmed by the sight of blood and the palpable fear on the young servant's face. She immediately recognized him and explained to her husband that the boy was Dalso, a recently acquired servant from the Choi household. The general, his expression unreadable, narrowed his eyes and asked why the boy was hiding in such a place. Dalso, mustering every ounce of courage, prostrated himself on the floor, offering a humble apology. He explained that he had brought in a table and prepared the room as instructed, but before he could leave, the general and his wife entered, leaving him no chance to escape without drawing attention. Fear had rooted him in place, and in his panic he made the mistake of hiding. Sohee's mother, seeing his sincerity and still shaken herself, spoke gently in his defense, explaining that the boy was young and unfamiliar with the strict protocols of the household. Her plea softened the tension in the room. After a long pause, the general suddenly let out a deep, hearty laugh, the kind that rolled from his chest like thunder. He remarked that the boy must have been an unwilling witness to quite the private scene, clearly amused by the awkwardness of the situation rather than angered further by it. Just then, from outside the room, Yuziang's voice was heard announcing his presence. He stated that he had heard shouting and rushed over out of concern. General Kwok sheathed his sword and stepped out to meet him, informing the young man that there was no need for alarm. The matter had already been handled. Calling for one of the older servants, the general pointed out Dalso's injury and instructed that he be tended to. The servant acknowledged the order, ushering Dalso away with a steady hand and a few muttered words, remarking as they walked that the boy was incredibly fortunate to still be breathing after such an incident. Later, inside a modest thatched house, Dalso lay resting on a straw mat. One side of his face was heavily wrapped in clean linen bandages, and though the wound was not life-threatening, the shock and humiliation weighed heavily on his young heart. Overwhelmed, he turned his face to the side and wept quietly. Without warning, the door burst open and Sohee entered, followed closely by Yoriam. Their expressions were frantic, eyes already glistening with tears. They rushed to Dalso's side, kneeling beside him, overcome by worry at the sight of his bandaged face. He sat up slowly, reassuring them in a hoarse voice that the wound had already been treated and would heal soon. Despite his words, both girls began to cry openly, their concern unrestrained. Through her sobs, Sohee apologized profusely for what her father had done, her guilt evident in every word. Dalso, however, gave a faint smile, telling her that it was all right. Outside the house, Yuziang stood silently, his attention drawn not to the conversation occurring within, but to his surroundings. Ever vigilant, his sharp senses caught the faint sound of something slicing through the air, a projectile aimed with precision. In a swift motion, he unsheathed his sword just enough to deflect the oncoming arrow, his body already in motion as he tracked the trajectory back to its origin. His eyes locked onto a figure retreating across the rooftops, a shadowy silhouette loosing another arrow mid-flight. Yuziang deflected the second arrow with equal ease, his form fluid and precise, before leaping into pursuit. The chase led him across narrow alleyways and over clustered rooftops until he reached a wide opening between buildings. There, the trail went cold, the attacker had vanished, swallowed by the silence and shadows of the night. Before he could reorient himself, a presence surged behind him, swift and calculated. Dual daggers flashed in the moonlight as the assailant struck, but Yuziang's instincts were faster. He parried the initial strike and sidestepped the rapid follow-up, his movements a blend of discipline and calm agility. Without drawing his blade, he shifted his stance and used the scabbard to deliver a precise strike to the attacker's head, stunning them long enough to bring the confrontation to a halt. He regarded the figure now at his feet, a mixture of mild exasperation and restrained authority in his demeanor. As the dust settled, the masked attacker slowly removed her face covering, revealing the features of a young woman. There was no malice in her gaze, only determination. She spoke calmly, reminding Yuziang that she had instructed him not to hold back. Her objective, it seemed, was to be tested, to be pushed beyond her limits. But Yuziang remained hesitant. He understood the weight of his strength and the risks it carried. Yet her resolve did not waver. She demanded seriousness, not sympathy, and urged him to stop hesitating and face her with the blade she knew he was holding back. Yielding to her conviction, Yuziang finally unleashed a single, decisive strike. The force and precision of the blow disarmed her in an instant, sending both daggers flying from her grasp. She stood in disbelief, stunned not by the pain but by the sheer skill and restraint behind the strike. Yuziang, expression unreadable, gently patted her on the head, a quiet signal that the bout was over. With a mix of frustration and admiration, the young woman turned away, vowing that their next encounter would end differently. Yuziang watched her go, letting out a quiet, weary sigh. A few days later, as the morning sun cast a warm, golden light over the estate, Dalso was diligently sweeping the front yard alongside another boy, their movements steady and purposeful. Not far away, the general stood with his warriors, his voice carrying a sense of determination and anticipation as he remarked that the day was perfect for a hunt. Meanwhile, servants bustled about, preparing horses with practiced efficiency, their actions signaling the start of an important event. Amid this flurry of activity, a young lady appeared, running briskly toward the general. Her urgency was clear as she pleaded to be allowed to join the hunt, confidently asserting her skills with both bow and horse. Dalso and the boy exchanged glances, the boy quietly explaining that this was likely Dalso's first encounter with the young woman who was no ordinary figure but the eldest daughter of the general known as Lady Surim. He leaned in slightly and whispered a cautious warning about her peculiar personality, advising Dalso to be careful in her presence. Lady Surim persisted, reminding the general of his promise that once she had mastered riding, she would be allowed to accompany him on the hunt. She argued earnestly that she deserved the chance to prove herself. Their exchange was abruptly interrupted by the sharp voice of the general's wife, who snapped at Surim, insisting that hunting was not an activity suited for a lady. Despite this, the general sided with his daughter, affirming that she could join the hunt. His wife's objections continued, pointing out the impropriety of Surim's participation, but the general retorted that if his wife was so opposed, she was welcome to accompany them herself. Without hesitation, Surim mounted a horse with confidence, skillfully handling the reins and drawing a quiet compliment from her father. Together, the group set off, the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves echoing as Dalso and the boy watched them depart, a mixture of curiosity and awe in their eyes. As the sun dipped toward the horizon later that day, Surim stood proudly atop a fallen boar, her triumph unmistakable. She called everyone's attention to the impressive prey she had brought down, leaving the servants visibly surprised and impressed. The general then declared that the feast would be prepared using the boar his daughter had so skillfully hunted, his pride evident in his voice. Meanwhile, his wife, exhausted from keeping up with Surim's energetic pace throughout the day, expressed her need to soothe her frazzled nerves and called upon Chimo, an older maidservant, to prepare a bath for her, signaling a moment of respite after the long, eventful day. Chimo instructed Dalso to prepare the bath, explaining that since everyone else was occupied helping with the feast, the responsibility of readying the water fell to him. She added that once the bathtub was filled, he should scatter rose petals into the water to enhance the experience. Dalso listened attentively and nodded in understanding, fully aware of the task before him. Later, Dalso was seen laboriously carrying pails of hot water, each load heavier than the last, as he made multiple trips to fill the bathtub. Though the effort taxed his young strength, he persisted until the tub was brimming with steaming water. Following Chimo's instructions, he carefully sprinkled the rose petals across the surface, their delicate fragrance mingling with the steam rising from the bath. A fleeting curiosity crossed his mind about how it might feel to soak in such a bath himself. He glanced around cautiously, making sure no one was watching, convincing himself that if he entered and exited quickly, no one would notice. With a mixture of nervousness and anticipation, he removed his clothes and eased into the hot water, immediately noticing the intense heat enveloping him. Minutes passed, and the warmth seeped deeper into his muscles, soothing the exhaustion from his earlier exertions. The comfort was so profound that a heavy drowsiness overcame him, his eyelids growing impossibly heavy until he finally drifted into a light sleep beneath the surface of the fragrant bath. Meanwhile, Sohee's mother approached the bathhouse and inquired with Chimo about the state of the water. Chimo reassured her that Dalso had prepared the bath with care. Sohee's mother remarked softly on how Dalso was still just a child and that such a demanding task must have been tiring for him. At that very moment, the sound of Sohee's mother's voice jolted Dalso awake. Panic set in as he realized she had already entered the bathhouse, leaving him with no choice but to conceal himself beneath the water's surface. Chimo soon appeared, carrying a tray laden with tea and snacks, which she placed nearby before quietly taking her leave. Dalso, struggling to hold his breath, found a moment to cautiously lift a small portion of his face above the water, using the tray to shield himself from view and catch a quick breath. Soon after, Sohee's mother stepped into the bathtub herself, her presence bringing a calm air to the space as she remarked on how perfectly warm the water felt, unaware of the hidden figure just beneath the surface. Dalso carefully shifted his position, inching quietly toward the far end of the bathtub in an effort to remain hidden from Sohee's mother's view. His movements were slow and deliberate, each adjustment made with the hope that he would go unnoticed as she settled into the warm water. Elsewhere, a group of servants gathered around a large table, sharing a hearty meal. Chimo moved among them, serving food with practiced grace. The head servant expressed amazement at the unexpected grandeur of the feast, crediting Lady Surim's skill and efforts for the abundance laid before them. Another servant added that if Surim maintained such a pace, they might never again worry about the dwindling meat supplies in the storage room. A third voice chimed in with a wistful observation, suggesting that Surim's talents and determination seemed more suited to a man's destiny, wondering aloud how renowned she might have become had she been born male. A nearby maidservant reminded the group that General Kwok still lacked a male heir, emphasizing the importance of continuing the family bloodline and legacy. Amidst the conversation, Yoriam asked if anyone had seen Dalso lately. The boy beside her replied that Dalso had been assigned the task of preparing the bath for Sohee's mother and that he had seen him carrying water earlier, but since then, Dalso had disappeared from sight. Yoriam excused herself, stating she was heading to the main house, and the boy teasingly remarked that he would be taking her share of the meat in her absence. Meanwhile, Surim and her sister Sohee shared a meal together. Surim inquired whether Sohee found the food to her liking, and Sohee responded enthusiastically, declaring it delicious. Surim then pointed out that Sohee ought to be grateful as she had personally hunted down the largest boar of the entire pack during their outing. Impressed, Sohee asked for confirmation that her sister had really taken down the boar with nothing but her bow. Surim hesitated for a moment before confidently affirming that she had accomplished the feat herself. Earlier in the day, the quiet forest clearing was interrupted by the sight of a boar hungrily preying upon a rat, its coarse snout rooting through the underbrush with focused intent. Nearby, hidden within the shelter of a thick bush, Surim crouched silently, her breath steady and her eyes sharp as she carefully took aim with her bow. She drew the string taut, aligning her arrow with unwavering concentration before releasing it with a sharp twang. The arrow flew true, striking the boar squarely in a vital spot, and Surim's heart surged with elation at her perfect shot. However, her triumph was short-lived. The wound ignited a fierce rage in the wounded beast, and with a terrifying snarl, it turned and charged straight toward her. Stunned by the sudden aggression, Surim scrambled to knock a second arrow, her hands trembling slightly as she struggled to regain composure. Just as the boar closed the distance, 3 swift and powerful arrows whistled through the air in rapid succession, each one striking the creature with deadly precision. The boar collapsed just meters away from her, its charge halted abruptly. The source of this timely intervention was none other than Yuziang, who had been watching from a distance and stepped in at the critical moment to prevent disaster. Surim, catching her breath and regaining her composure, turned to him with a mixture of irritation and disbelief, questioning why he had interrupted her moment of victory when she had clearly made the shot. Yuziang calmly explained that the boar had already sustained a lethal wound before his arrows struck, assuring her that the kill rightfully belonged to her and that his actions were merely damage control to protect her from harm. Returning to the present moment, Sohee, with a tone tinged with regret, remarked that it was unfortunate Surim had been born a woman, implying that her talents might have garnered greater recognition if she were male. Sohee then half-jokingly suggested that Surim should simply start dressing and behaving like a man to better reflect her skills and assertiveness. Surim, clearly irritated by the comment, snapped back sharply at her sister, prompting Sohee to quickly backtrack, insisting she had only been teasing. At that moment, Yoriam approached Sohee with a look of anxious concern. She explained that nearly everyone in the household was present at the feast, yet Dalso was conspicuously absent, and she wondered if Sohee had noticed his whereabouts. Sohee shook her head, admitting that she had not seen Dalso anywhere that day. Meanwhile, Dalso remained concealed beneath the surface of the warm bathwater, his body submerged and hidden from view as Sohee's mother relaxed above him, completely unaware of his presence. She luxuriated in the soothing heat of the bath, occasionally reaching for the tray of snacks placed nearby, savoring the treats with quiet contentment. Dalso's heart pounded anxiously, silently pleading that she would not pick up the tray once she had finished, knowing that any movement might reveal his hiding place. His mind raced with regret and apprehension, chastising himself for having taken such a reckless risk by sneaking into the bath in the first place. Although Sohee's mother was known for her kindness and forgiving nature, Dalso was painfully aware that this particular situation was far from ordinary and that her reaction might be far less understanding once his presence was discovered. Elsewhere, Sohee approached Yoriam to inquire about Dalso's whereabouts, to which Yoriam explained that he had been tasked with preparing the bath for Sohee's mother earlier that day. Concerned, Sohee suggested they investigate the bathhouse area together to see if they could find any sign of him, and the two set off in that direction. Back at the bath, Sohee's mother finished the last of the snacks on the tray and began contemplating whether she should carry the tray with her when she left the bath. At that moment, Dalso's eyes widened in panic beneath the water's surface, his mind racing with the terrifying realization that if she did indeed take the tray, there would be no place left for him to remain hidden, and that his secret would inevitably be uncovered, leaving him vulnerable and exposed. As Sohee's mother reached out to lift the tray, Sohee suddenly entered the bathhouse, prompting her mother to ask what had brought her in. Sohee quickly inquired if her mother had seen Dalso anywhere nearby, to which her mother responded that she had not noticed him around, and in the process, she accidentally dropped the tray onto the floor. Sohee let out a worried sigh but soon caught sight of Dalso quietly submerged in the bathwater. Without hesitation, she urged her mother to step outside for a moment, and her mother complied, stepping out and asking Sohee what was wrong. From her vantage point, Sohee watched as Dalso stealthily climbed out of the bathtub and slipped out of the bathhouse, trying to avoid being seen. Meanwhile, Sohee scrambled to think of an excuse for asking her mother to leave the room and settled on praising the boar's delicious taste, explaining that she wanted to announce it and request additional servings. Her mother, amused, asked if that was the real reason she wanted her to come out of the bath, to which Sohee nodded affirmatively. Her mother then pointed out that the moon was already high in the sky and suggested that Sohee should ask Diko-chun to help find Dalso while she herself should get some rest. Later that evening, Sohee confronted Dalso, questioning him about his unexpected presence in the bathtub earlier. Dalso meekly confessed that he had never taken a proper bath before and was simply curious to try it out. He explained that he had intended to leave quickly, but Sohee's mother had arrived sooner than he anticipated. Sohee, shaking her head, warned him that his risky action could have easily ended in disaster, prompting Dalso to offer a sincere apology for the trouble he had caused. Sohee then leaned in close, urging Dalso in a hushed tone not to share any details about what had transpired earlier with anyone else, emphasizing that if the elders were to find out, it could lead to serious trouble for both of them. She reassured him that the boar they had enjoyed was quite delicious and, noticing that he must have been starving, gently encouraged him to join the others and eat his fill. The following morning, as the first light of dawn broke across the sky, the boy appeared beside Dalso, gently scolding him for still looking groggy and sluggish as they went about their chore of sweeping the grounds. Their quiet morning routine was soon interrupted by the arrival of Surim, who approached them with an air of authority and inquired whether Dalso was the new servant. Dalso responded with a respectful nod and greeted her politely. Without wasting a moment, Surim ordered both boys to follow her, causing the boy to grimace with reluctance while Dalso, puzzled, hesitated briefly but obeyed. The trio soon arrived at the archery training ground, a wide-open space lined with targets and worn patches of grass. Armed with nothing more than simple wooden sticks, both Dalso and the boy soon realized Surim's true intention was for them to engage her in mock combat. Without hesitation, the boy charged forward aggressively, swinging his stick, only to have Surim effortlessly dodge the attack with swift, fluid movements before quickly taking him down in a display of skill that left Dalso wide-eyed and astonished. Turning her attention to Dalso, Surim invited him to attack as well. Dalso, thinking carefully, reasoned that if he simply mimicked the boy's reckless approach, he was bound to suffer the same defeat. Despite this, he summoned his courage and lunged forward with a sweeping strike of his stick. Surim dodged nimbly, the attack narrowly missing its mark, but Dalso pressed on with a follow-up assault. This time Surim managed to block the strike and retaliated with a sharp kick that sent Dalso crashing to the ground. Without hesitation, she began raining down a series of punches, forcing Dalso to quickly surrender in defeat. Surim, somewhat impressed, remarked that Dalso was a stronger opponent than the boy. Realizing his only option was to endure her beating until she was satisfied, Dalso accepted his role in the training. Eventually, Surim ceased her onslaught and took her leave, leaving Dalso to catch his breath. Meanwhile, the boy sprang back to his feet, shouting with relief and a hint of disbelief, asking if he was still alive after the rigorous encounter. Day after day passed filled with laughter and shared moments, the bonds between Sohee, Dalso, and the others growing stronger with each passing evening. One particular night, as the world settled into quiet stillness, Sohee and Dalso found themselves lying side by side on a soft bed of grass beneath the vast expanse of the night sky. Their eyes traced the countless stars scattered above them, shimmering like scattered jewels in the darkness. In a gentle voice, Sohee broke the silence, wondering aloud how many years had passed since Dalso had first become part of their lives. Dalso pondered for a moment before replying thoughtfully that it had been 3 years, or perhaps even 4. Sohee mused that time truly had a way of slipping by unnoticed, then turned her gaze back upward, remarking on how breathtakingly beautiful the stars looked that night. Dalso nodded in agreement, sharing that he had once been told every person had their own star in the sky, a special light meant just for them. Curiosity sparked, so he asked which star he believed was hers. Without hesitation, Dalso pointed to a particular star that twinkled more brightly than the others, explaining quietly that it was his favorite star because it shone with a brilliance unmatched by the rest, a star he thought suited Sohee perfectly. The warmth of his words caused a soft blush to rise on Sohee's cheeks. Smiling shyly, she then pointed toward a neighboring star and declared that it must be Dalso's star, close to hers in the sky, just as he was always close by her side in life. Feeling the gentle tug of sleep, Sohee confessed that she was growing drowsy. Dalso agreed, noting the hour was late and suggesting they should return to the main house before the night grew deeper. But Sohee, too tired to walk, softly insisted that Dalso carry her back. Soon after, Dalso was seen bearing Sohee on his back, carefully making their way through the cool night air as they headed back toward the warm lights of the main house. On a bright day, Dalso was observed diligently splitting firewood, his figure now noticeably more mature and stronger than before, the lines of hard work etched subtly onto his face and arms. As he worked, Uriam approached him with a purposeful stride, informing him that Sohee had been asking to see him. Curious and slightly concerned, Dalso inquired about what had happened, but Uriam admitted she wasn't certain of the details. She urged him to hurry and visit Sohee without delay, then handed him a small bag. Opening it, Dalso discovered several fresh melons inside, which took him by surprise. He couldn't help but question Uriam, wondering why she had brought such a large quantity and reminding her to consider the consequences if they were caught with such a conspicuous gift. Uriam calmly reassured him that since he had been laboring outside all day under the sun's heat, no one would suspect anything unusual. Accepting her reasoning, Dalso tucked the melons under his arm as they set off together, and he couldn't help but remark on how sweet the fruit smelled and must surely taste. Later, Dalso arrived outside Sohee's residence, calling out softly to ask if she had indeed been waiting for him. The door opened and Sohee appeared, greeting him warmly and inviting him inside without hesitation. Meanwhile, outside the residence, Uriam was seen pacing slowly around the courtyard, her steps measured and thoughtful as she mulled over the unexpected reason why Sohee would summon Dalso at such a time. The warm sun beat down on her, making the air heavy and thick, yet her curiosity outweighed any discomfort from the heat. She wondered quietly to herself about the nature of the meeting, speculating on what Sohee could possibly want from Dalso that warranted a private conversation. Inside the house, Sohee was quietly preparing a special gift for Dalso. She had carefully woven a piece of cloth adorned with intricate star patterns, reminiscent of the very stars they had spoken about during their late-night conversations. With a shy but sincere smile, she presented the cloth to Dalso as a token of her deep appreciation and gratitude for all he had done. Dalso's eyes widened in surprise and admiration as he took the gift into his hands. He marveled at the delicate craftsmanship and the time Sohee must have spent creating such a beautiful and meaningful present. His voice carried a mixture of awe and heartfelt thanks as he told Sohee he could hardly believe she had given him something so precious, and he expressed his sincerest gratitude for the gesture. Meanwhile, standing just beyond the slightly ajar door, Uriam tried discreetly to listen in on the conversation, her curiosity piqued as she strained to catch any hint of what the gift might be. However, the words exchanged between Sohee and Dalso were soft and low, slipping past her hearing. Soon, Sohee leaned in close to Dalso, whispering a request directly into his ear, a favor that Uriam was unable to discern despite her closest attention. After a few moments, Dalso emerged from the residence and spotted Uriam waiting at the entrance. She immediately asked him what had transpired between him and Sohee, hoping for some insight. Dalso, however, smiled mysteriously and replied that the matter was a secret. Uriam feigned disinterest, teasing him by saying she wasn't curious at all, through her eyes betrayed her true feelings. The two began walking together down the path, the sun pressing down on them heavily. Uriam commented on how hot the day had become, to which Dalso nodded in agreement. Without hesitation, she offered to refresh his back a little, a gesture that brought a faint smile to Dalso's face. Meanwhile, Sohee was wandering near the residence, glancing around with a worried expression as she wondered where Uriam might have gone in the sweltering heat. It wasn't long before she spotted both Dalso and Uriam together nearby. Dalso was positioned firmly in a plank stance, muscles tense and body steady as he maintained the posture. Nearby, Uriam gently poured cool water over his back, the droplets cascading down his skin and offering much-needed relief from the oppressive heat of the day. The refreshing sensation seemed to ease some of the strain from Dalso's exertion. Unbeknownst to them, Sohee quietly observed the scene from a short distance, her eyes fixed on the two with a mixture of curiosity and a gentle smile playing on her lips. After a few moments, Sohee stepped forward and revealed herself, causing both Uriam and Dalso to startle slightly at her sudden presence. However, their initial surprise quickly melted into warm greetings as they acknowledged her arrival. Sohee remarked casually that the day was particularly hot and expressed her desire to cool off herself, suggesting she would like to enjoy some fresh watermelon. Turning to Uriam, she asked politely if she could go to the fields to pick some ripe watermelons and prepare them for her, to which Uriam nodded affirmatively and promptly excused herself to fulfill the request. Dalso, seeing the moment, also prepared to take his leave, but Sohee stopped him gently. She instructed him to remain lying down, offering to continue refreshing him just as Uriam had done moments before. With a soft smile, Sohee began pouring cool water over his back, the liquid soothing and cool against his skin. She looked at him kindly and asked if the water felt refreshing enough, to which Dalso replied affirmatively, encouraging her to continue. However, Sohee suddenly became flustered, a wave of hesitation washing over her as she insisted on taking her leave only after walking for a short while. Then, just as she was about to depart, she abruptly remembered that she had forgotten her fan. Without further delay, she retraced her steps to retrieve it, leaving the scene momentarily. Meanwhile, Yoriam was out in the open field, struggling with the task of reaching a watermelon, her frustration growing as she silently complained to herself about why Sohee wouldn't simply leave her alone with Dalso. The tension in the air was palpable as Yoriam grumbled, clearly irritated by Sohee's persistent presence. Suddenly, Hyung interrupted the scene with a playful prank, catching Yoriam off guard and startling her significantly. He commented on how unbearably hot the day was and questioned what she was doing lingering in the sun's relentless heat. Yoriam, visibly annoyed, shot back with a sharp retort that made it clear she was not in the mood for his teasing and warned him that if he pulled another prank, the consequences would be severe. Hyung quickly defended himself, explaining that there had been a fly bothering her and he was merely trying to help. Then, shifting the conversation, he hinted at something about Dalso, provoking an intense reaction from Yoriam, who suddenly exploded in anger. In a fit of rage, she was about to strike him on the head with the very watermelon she had been struggling to pick earlier. Before she could follow through, Hyung urged her to wait, producing something from his pocket. Yoriam took it, her initial anger dissipating into surprise when she realized it was a piece of jewelry. Curiosity flickered across her face as she wondered aloud where he could have gotten it, suspecting that perhaps he had been gambling again. Hyung reassured her that the jewelry was something he had been saving up for over several months. Gratitude softened Yoriam's expression as she silently thanked him for the thoughtful gift. Taking advantage of the moment, Hyung suggested that perhaps they could go to the lake at night so she could wear the jewelry then. He also indicated there was something important he wanted to share with her, but he preferred to do so away from the others. Yoriam, however, seemed reluctant to engage further, asserting that if he truly wished to tell her something, they were alone enough right then and there. Before Hyung could respond, Yoriam abruptly turned and began to leave, stating that she needed to go see Dalso. Frustrated and unable to let the moment slip away, Hyung quickly followed after her, determined to return the jewelry and possibly salvage the opportunity to share what was on his mind. Meanwhile, Sohee was seen moving quietly through the dense bushes, her eyes catching sight of Dalso as he engaged in his solitary workout, focused and unaware of any observers. After a while, Dalso concluded his exercise and left the area, completely oblivious to the fact that Sohee had been watching him all along. Later that night, within the men's sleeping quarters, Hyung was observed carefully slipping out of the room, making sure not to disturb the others who were sound asleep. His movements were deliberate and quiet, revealing that he had a specific purpose for leaving under the cover of darkness. Not long after, Dalso stirred from his rest, sitting up suddenly as if sensing that Hyung's actions were more than mere restlessness. Soon enough, Dalso found Hyung by the lake, where the stillness of the night enveloped them. Hyung motioned for silence, indicating that something significant was about to begin. Moments later, Yoriam appeared by the water's edge, coming down for her usual nighttime bathing ritual. Dalso's curiosity was piqued, wondering how Hyung had anticipated Yoriam's arrival so precisely. Hyung calmly explained that it was common for guys to be attuned to such routines. He pointed out that the clothes hanging out to dry were a telltale sign that summer was drawing to a close and that Yoriam always made her way to the river at night for a refreshing dip once the days grew shorter. Dalso's mind drifted back to their childhood, recalling how they used to bathe together a few times when they were very young. But as Yoriam grew older, the familiarity faded. The most he could catch sight of was her legs, and she had always been someone he regarded as a sister. So he sat alone in her room, her mind unable to escape the thoughts from earlier that day when she had seen Dalso working out by himself. Despite her best efforts to push the notion away, her imagination began to wander, conjuring a vivid scene in which Dalso had come to her room and confessed his feelings. She was acutely aware of how improper such thoughts were. After all, Dalso was her servant, and the social boundaries between them were clear and unbreachable. Still, the possibility, however fleeting and forbidden, lingered persistently in her mind, filling her with a mix of excitement and guilt. Meanwhile, Dalso and Hyung stood quietly by the riverbank, their eyes fixed on Yoriam as she bathed in the cool water under the moonlight. Hyung, ever blunt and teasing, made a pointed comment about Dalso's feelings toward Yoriam. Dalso responded calmly, acknowledging that Yoriam was a kind and good-hearted girl. Hyung immediately retorted with a sharp warning, making it clear that Yoriam was his and that any intentions from Dalso would be met with serious consequences. Dalso, however, took the warning in stride, assuring Hyung that he had been bested by Yoriam too many times to ever see her as anything other than a friend. Suddenly, the tense silence was broken by a sharp hissing noise. Both men turned swiftly toward the source and spotted a snake slithering nearby. Hyung let out a startled scream before the snake disappeared quickly into the thick bushes. Yoryum, hearing the commotion, called out to see who was hiding in the shadows, peering toward the bush from which the noise had come. Without hesitation, Hyung fled, abandoning Dalso in the moonlit clearing. Dalso, though reluctant, soon followed after him, chuckling quietly to himself about how Hyung had always been the fastest to run away in moments of danger. However, Dalso's escape was short-lived. His foot caught on a small, hidden rock, causing him to stumble and fall to the ground. At that moment, Yoryum caught up to him, her eyes widening in surprise when she recognized who had tripped. Dalso attempted to explain himself, but his attention was quickly drawn to the snake, now making its way toward Yoryum. He urgently warned her to be cautious, but before she could react, the snake lunged and bit her on the leg. She collapsed to the ground in pain. Reacting swiftly, Dalso grabbed the snake with his bare hands and hurled it far into the bushes, ensuring it would no longer pose a threat. Concern flooding his features, he knelt beside Yoryum and checked on her, asking if she was all right. She admitted to being bitten, and Dalso's worry deepened as he realized it could be venomous. He insisted on helping her by extracting the venom before it could spread, though Yoryum hesitated, unsure whether she wanted to endure the painful procedure. With gentle insistence, Dalso urged her to trust him and show him the bite, emphasizing the urgency of removing the poison to prevent further harm. Dalso carefully began the process of extracting the venom from Yoryum's bite, his hands steady and focused despite the urgency of the situation. He worked diligently for some time, doing his best to alleviate the danger he feared might be spreading through her body. After a while, he paused and cautiously asked if his efforts had been sufficient to remove the venom. Yoryum, with a mix of exasperation and amusement, called him an idiot, revealing that there had never been any venom to begin with. Dalso's eyes then shifted and he quickly came to the same conclusion, that the species was harmless and posed no real threat. Dalso's thoughts drifted back to the countless times Yoryum had cared for him, especially during moments when he was vulnerable, like when he had injured his face. Despite being a year younger, she always seemed to carry herself with a maturity beyond her years, quietly standing by his side through thick and thin. He recalled how she once noticed how frequently he fell ill during the harsh winters and, with thoughtful concern, had given him a special herb to boost his strength and help him endure the cold. In that moment, Dalso felt a deep appreciation for Yoryum, recognizing her as not just a friend but an extraordinary woman whose kindness and resilience left a lasting impression on him. As they prepared to resume their workout, Hyung came into view, breathless and panting heavily after a long sprint. His frustration was clear, fueled by the earlier disruption caused by the snake. He suspected that Dalso must have been caught by Yoryum during the chaos and quietly chastised him, feeling that Dalso shouldn't be the one to rat him out. Yet, beneath his irritation, an uneasy sensation gnawed at him. Grabbing a sturdy stick for protection, Hyung ventured back into the forest, hoping that his worries were unfounded and that the situation wasn't as troubling as his instincts suggested. And so, that was how Dalso and Yoryum ended up sharing their first workout together in the quiet seclusion of the forest. Meanwhile, Hyung made his way through the dense trees, determined to uncover what had really happened back there. Though exhaustion weighed heavily on him, he pressed onward, puzzled and frustrated by the absence of both Dalso and Yoryum. As he paused, catching his breath, a sudden rustling sound nearby caught his attention. Assuming it must be Dalso and Yoryum, his anger flared. Convinced that Dalso had betrayed him, he gripped his stick tightly, ready to confront him. But when he approached the source of the noise, he was met not by his friend, but by two startled rabbits scurrying through the underbrush. Relief washed over him as the tension drained away, forcing him to reconsider his suspicions. Perhaps Dalso was not the traitor he had imagined. Meanwhile, having finished their workout, Dalso gently lifted Yoryum into his arms for the journey back. Despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of walking, he insisted on carrying her to ease her fatigue, bearing the weight without complaint. Back on his own, Hyung remained by the forest's edge, waiting in the hope that Dalso might eventually return. Suddenly, a snake slithered past him, prompting a startled shout and a quick leap away from the creature. Just then, Saram appeared, smirking at his reaction. She mocked him for fleeing from a harmless snake, teasing that as a man, he should be ashamed of such cowardice, her words sharp but laced with playful challenge. The next morning, as the servants busied themselves cleaning the compound under the soft light of dawn, Dalso found his thoughts repeatedly drifting back to the events of the previous night with Yoryum. A subtle, lingering smile played on his lips, one that Hyung quickly noticed. Hyung's curiosity was piqued by Dalso's unusually cheerful demeanor since waking, leading him to suspect that something out of the ordinary had occurred. Unable to contain his suspicion any longer, Hyung decided to confront Dalso about his late return the night before. Caught off guard by the sudden questioning, Dalso hesitated for a moment before hastily fabricating a story about wandering around in the night due to sleeplessness. Yet, Hyung was not easily fooled. He caught the subtle signs of deceit, the averted gaze, the nervous tone, and silently marked the lie without pressing further. Amidst this exchange, Yoriam passed through their midst, her expression unreadable but tinged with a seriousness that caught Dalso off guard. He couldn't help but wonder if she harbored some resentment or frustration over their shared experience the night before. However, Yoriam ignored them and went straight to Sohee. Meanwhile, in her room, Sohee was wrestling with her own restless thoughts. The memory of Dalso lingered persistently in her mind, preventing her from falling asleep throughout the night. When Yoriam entered to begin her daily chores, she immediately noticed Sohee's strained expression and gently asked if she had slept well. Caught between honesty and discretion, Sohee chose to mask her inner turmoil and lied, claiming she wasn't particularly tired. Yoriam, sensing Sohee's discomfort, quickly offered to finish her chores sooner so that Sohee could get some rest, but Sohee, not wanting to trouble her, insisted she was fine and told Yoriam not to bother on her account. Yet beneath this calm exchange, Sohee harbored a private curiosity. She longed to ask Yoriam whether she had ever been with a man, a question born from her knowledge of the servants' close-knit relationships where eating, resting, and comforting one another were common. Sohee was aware of the closeness between Yoriam and Hyung and how Yoriam often found herself at the center of attention, surrounded by warmth and companionship. In contrast, Sohee's nights were spent alone. While Sohee was quietly eating, Yoriam observed that her cheeks were gradually flushing with a soft pink hue. Concern crept into Yoriam's mind, prompting her to check on Sohee's well-being out of genuine worry, wanting to ensure that her friend was not troubled by anything. Meanwhile, Sohee's thoughts drifted back to an earlier moment when she had felt reassured by the knowledge that Yoriam was someone she could rely on whenever doubts clouded her mind. However, the present situation was different. Sohee found herself unable to reveal the source of her distress, particularly because it stemmed from Dalso, and she wished to keep that hidden from Yoriam. As time passed, Sohee's mind began to entertain uneasy suspicions that Yoriam and Dalso might be secretly conspiring together, sharing concerns behind her back. Despite this unsettling thought, she resisted believing it to be true, clinging to her trust in both Dalso and Yoriam, confident that neither would behave in such a way. Later on, as Yoriam was leaving Sohee's room, she encountered Dalso and Hyung returning from a trip to gather wood. Upon spotting Yoriam, Dalso attempted to initiate a conversation with her. However, before he could engage further, Hyung quickly noticed Dalso's intentions and urged him to hurry along, reminding him of the many tasks waiting to be done. Seeing no opportunity to speak with Yoriam at that moment, Dalso promised that they would talk later. Yoriam's puzzled expression betrayed her uncertainty about what needed to be discussed, which made Dalso feel uneasy and guilty. Unable to explain himself, he quietly turned away without offering any reassurance. As the day went on and Dalso busied himself with his work, he found it increasingly difficult to keep his attention focused, as his eyes kept drifting toward Yoriam. He searched for every possible chance to speak with her, his mind restless with anticipation. Meanwhile, Hyung kept a close watch on Dalso's behavior, sensing something unusual. He remained vigilant, unwilling to take his eyes off Dalso, driven by a nagging distrust of his companion's intentions on that particular day. Just at that moment, the head of the servants made his entrance into the spacious yard, his footsteps firm and purposeful as he scanned the area before calling out loudly for Hyung. The tone in his voice conveyed urgency, as he informed Hyung that he was needed immediately because new tasks were about to be assigned to the foreign servants who had recently arrived. He explained that these assignments required someone who was not only reliable but also skilled in both counting and writing quickly and accurately. Having observed Hyung's abilities over time, the head servant knew that Hyung was one of the few who could handle such responsibilities efficiently. With no hesitation, he requested Hyung's presence, emphasizing that his help was essential to properly organize the work. Hyung, taken aback and deeply surprised that the head servant would single him out for this important role, found himself hesitant to accept. He felt unworthy of the responsibility and, with a mix of modesty and reluctance, politely declined the request. Instead, Hyung suggested that the head servant assign the task to Dalso, who was with him at that moment. Hyung argued that Dalso was better suited, despite Dalso's own humble denial of being especially clever or quick. Hyung hoped that, by redirecting the request, he could avoid the pressure and continue watching over Yoriam as he usually did. However, the head servant was not fooled by Hyung's excuse. Having known Hyung's true capabilities for a long time, he was fully aware that Hyung was only trying to evade the task. Without wasting time on further persuasion, the head servant dismissed the pretense and sternly ordered Hyung to stop pretending and to follow him immediately. His voice carried an authoritative finality that left no room for argument. Still unwilling to give up, Hyung made one last attempt to convince the head servant to reconsider and take Dalso instead, explaining that Dalso could easily read and comprehend almost anything. He mentioned that Dalso had learned to read and write from Sohee after he began working there.